Welcome to The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm T.Morais, your host and moderator. This program has been created to educate, inform, and help you with law matters because the law matters. Understand the law better, and you're in a better position to decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. We continue to provide information and resources that'll help you decide whether or not you want to contact a lawyer. Perhaps we'll be able to help you determine that you can handle some issues yourself. If you do need professional counsel, you'll be better prepared, and so will the professional you select. Either way, as usually is the case, we want you to have the best possible outcome, save time, save money, and hopefully achieve the best possible results. The Bazar and Associates law firm in East Providence continue to help us with all of the issues that we tackle, and once again we want to welcome and thank David Bazar.
Thank you.
Counselor. Recently we discussed personal injury cases, the automobile accidents, what happens from initial treatment and insurance claims to negotiations to court if that's what happens. There are general damages, special damages, and as we discussed, those calculations can certainly account for sizable amounts. So you may end up going to court, but you may also settle, as they say, out of court. Today we're going to tackle what should you actually do if you decide to settle out of court. That is actually an important matter to resolve. How do you take that money? How do you collect that money? Consider your future. Consider even the tax impact. So today, what you need to know, the pros, the cons, the problems associated with it, and who better than David to help us tackle it. So when we talked about it the other day, it was about automobile accidents. What other kinds of personal injury cases and what kinds of cases are usually considered with settlements? And then we'll talk about what they are.
Yeah, what we're talking about are personal injury or bodily injury cases, because those fall into a special section of the IRS code when we're going to talk about potentially structuring those settlements. But in any event, any injury that is to your body that can be caused by an automobile accident, a slip and fall, medical malpractice case, products liability claim, as long as the injury is of physical or bodily nature, emotional injuries can fall under that if there's a physical component to that, then they would fall under the section that we need them to in order to talk about structured settlements.
Workers' comp also, right?
Workers' comp, yes, because workers' comp means that you were injured to such an extent that you're unable to do your job.
So when we talk about the settlement, and as you mentioned, a structured settlement, what actually is that? How do you define it? Okay,
so there are a number of different times where you would consider structuring your settlement. And on larger cases, and certainly for cases involving children, you want to structure the payments so that they come at a certain point in time that are helpful for the person who we're protecting. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a case where I represented a person who, as a result of the injury, became a quadriplegic. So it was a very large settlement. Some of the money was needed up front to pay medical bills that had already been incurred. Some of it was needed to have money just to have to pay for bills and other things as they would come up, and actually to restructure the home so that she could get around in a wheelchair without having to bump into walls and make turns she couldn't make and get up and down stairs. So a lot of this money was taken up front, but a lot of it was put into a structure. And what a structure is a special type of annuity. It's an annuity that pays out tax-free. And the reason it can pay out tax-free is because it's paying money for personal injury. And a settlement of a personal injury case is a tax-free result. And if the money goes directly into the structured settlement and not into the injured person's hands first, then the money that goes in, as well as the interest that it accrues, can be paid out tax-free. And in that particular case, we wanted money to pay for future medical care. So there's money coming out monthly to pay for nursing and that type of thing. Then there's money that was put in it to pay for every 5 or 7 years or so a new van to get her around in, because that would become necessary as those things no longer have a useful life. Certainly the same thing for wheelchairs and that type of thing. So money was built into this structure, and that structure was designed to pay for the rest of her life with a certain period of it guaranteed. So if she were to die before, say, 10 years, the 10 years would have been payable to her estate, her beneficiaries. But if she lived beyond that period of time, she collects it for as long as she lives. And so the reason you have a date certain, that a sum that's certain, a payable period that doesn't go away even if the person dies, is because of the amount of money that goes in. You want to make sure you at least collect that back.
So there are so many issues about this. The one thing that every website and every article seems to champion right up front, structured settlement, that's the way you save on your taxes. But when there is a personal injury suit, there is the general damage, or there's special damage. I lost my clothing, I lost my ability to make money at work, and then there's a punitive damage. There are actually some pieces of that apparently don't qualify for non-taxable. How does that work, David?
Sure. In a personal injury claim, punitive damages don't apply. If there's an award of punitive damages, it's not for bodily injury, so punitive damages would be taxable. And so you can't put that in, you can put it in a structure, but it won't be tax-free. It's like buying an annuity after the fact with the money you got from a personal injury case. Whatever goes into the annuity, you own, but you pay tax on the interest that comes out. Punitive damages are generally taxable because it's not bodily injury, and therefore it's not a good candidate for a structured settlement.
And what about a lawyer's fee? You are involved with these things for some long time, and you are entitled to be paid, of course. Mm-hmm. Is a lawyer's fee part of that? Is that taxable? Is that part of that piece, or how does that work?
Here's what happens with that. The attorney's fee is calculated on what's called the present value. How much of the money is going into the structure that pays for the structure on today's dollars, not what comes out of the structure. So the attorney can get paid based on that value. So, for example, if $5 million is going into the structure, and over the course of time, we expect 15 million, say, to come out in additional money, you don't get paid as the attorney on that full amount. You get paid on the amount going in, the present value. Attorneys, however, can and sometimes do structure their fee too. So it may go into a separate annuity payable out in terms that are helpful to the attorney, but since money is being structured for the client, money for the fee can be structured as well.
Just as an aside, why would that ever help an attorney? Because he's making so much at a given time, he doesn't want to have that lump sum, not a lump sum, but he doesn't want that payout initially.
So that's
okay.
A good reason to do it. So let's say, for sake of argument, that you have a $30 million case, and now all of a sudden you have a $10 million fee as the attorney, and most people don't care about us paying taxes, but we pay our fair share. But to structure it out delays paying the tax on it. You do pay the tax on it. When the money comes out, you pay tax on it. So if you settle a case and you happen to have 3 children ready to go to college over the next 12 years, it might be helpful to get that paid out over the next 12 years rather than in one lump sum.
So in the same way as your client might need to think about his future, so might a lawyer.
Right. And there's more tax saving to the client because everything in there grows tax-free because it's personal injury. For the lawyer, it's all taxable when it comes out. It's just that you delay paying the tax until it comes out.
Okay. And the other element that happens if someone's injured and they immediately have some medical bills, and there's been some insurance already paying for those medical bills, how does that impact on whatever that final amount or settlement is? Does that get subtracted first?
It depends on the coverage.
Okay.
So if you have medical coverage that you pay for through work or your work pays for you on your behalf, and call it Blue Cross, all right? So let's say Blue Cross pays all of your medical bills. When you settle, Blue Cross will typically have a lien on the settlement for whatever they paid out. but a portion of your settlement goes to attorney's fees. So to recognize that, Blue Cross will reduce its lien by a percentage. And so that money goes back to the client. The other advantage of using Blue Cross, for example, to pay for your medical bills is they pay at a reduced rate. So if you get a hospital bill for $20,000 and it's on a contract with Blue Cross and Blue Cross pays the hospital 10, and you only have to pay Blue Cross back $7,500, it helps you in being able to settle a case with a cheap insurance company because they're supposed to consider the full amount of the bill, and they're not supposed to get credit for what we would call the collateral source, Blue Cross, which paid, because Blue Cross, number one, you paid a premium for, and number two, and more importantly, they negotiated the reduction in the rate. Otherwise, you would have been responsible for the full amount.
Good to know. So we're talking primarily about this structured settlement and that it's done as an annuity, and I want to get into the details of that. But the other option often is that lump sum. Is there ever, or when is the best case where someone should consider taking a lump sum versus trying to structure a settlement with an annuity?
So I gave you an example of one particular reason why you would structure a settlement in the large case. Another reason you would structure, which we'll answer on the other side when you might not, is if you have a child who's injured. And when a child is injured and there's a case that's worth more than $10,000 in Rhode Island, it has to go to what's called a friendly suit. And what that means is the court has to approve the settlement. And one of the main things the court's going to be concerned with is how are we protecting this money for the child? If the money's going to the parents, do they know it's the child's money? And are they going to put it in a bank and lock it up and keep it for the child and not use it for other things? And judges and lawyers, we're always supposed to be skeptical, are always skeptical and want to make sure that we can afford the child the best protection that we can. So oftentimes we'll put those cases into structures. And the structure may become available when the child turns 18 or 19 or 20. If you think the child's going to go to college and you do that, you might be interfering with whatever financial awards might be given from the college or other scholarships they might be able to get. So oftentimes we'll say, well, let's structure it so they get some money then, but bulk of it after 24 or whenever they're done with college. So if they had to take some college loans, then maybe they'll get a lump sum of money after that. But it won't have interfered with whatever financial awards they might have been entitled to otherwise. And also you can even structure it out on a longer period of time, but always with the child's best interest in mind.
So you're saying there are times when you might combine it. You might have a lump sum, not the whole lump sum,
right,
and then portions that are for settlement.
I think almost every case, some of it has to be taken up front because there are bills that have to be paid and people need some money up front. And with the child, you maybe want to buy the child a computer or something for school or something reasonable. A non-child type case, if it's not that big a case, you don't want to structure it because there's a cost to the structure. It is really made up for very quickly in a large case through the interest that the annuity is going to pay. But if you're not putting a lot of money in, then the percentage of that cost really goes up because some of it's a fixed cost, it's not a percentage. And some of those fixed costs will take a long time to capture back. So unless you need something structured out for like the child or something, it's probably in a smaller case more reasonable just to take the money in a lump sum.
So as you begin to discuss this, David, you're a lawyer, you certainly understand the law. You have a good sense of money. When someone is about to make that decision, while you're guiding them, what other professionals, or are there other professionals that you would suggest that they consult with?
Certainly in larger cases, we always suggest that they speak to their own financial people because those financial people will be at odds with the companies that represent you in the structured settlement because they want you to take as much money as you can up front so they can invest it, and the other folks want to put away as much money for you as they can because they make a fee on it as well. And so it's good to have a little bit of that interaction so that you then can make the best decision for yourself. How much of it do you want tax-free? How much do you want to take out, have access to, but pay tax on?
Tax accountant too,
Could be. Yep.
perhaps, that would make sense too. In these cases, this assumes that someone has the insurance to cover when the defendant, that is, has the insurance to cover whatever this is. Suppose someone doesn't have coverage, they might be awarded the win, the favorable judgment, but they may not ever collect. This could be another topic, I suppose.
Yeah.
But if there isn't an insurance coverage or a liability coverage in place, does all of this become moot, David?
Well, yes.
Okay.
It does. And one of the things the attorneys look for is collectability of a judgment. And maybe in the old days, or maybe even still today, we need the deep pocket. You need somebody somewhere who can afford to pay the judgment. So if there's no insurance company to pay for it, is the defendant judgment proof? Meaning, if we get a judgment against that person, can we collect it? Or will bankruptcy on their part wipe it out? So you need to know that going in, and that will inform you on whatever decisions you make about what to do with a case.
Okay. So let's go through the analysis of what happens. A judgment's made, your client wins and is entitled to $1 million. What's the process by which you've determined that they're going to do a structured settlement? How does it play out?
So what we do is when we get to the point where there's going to be a settlement, and usually that's done prior to a judgment, because it's a settlement.
It's a settlement.
So you bring in somebody. Now, this is actually a good comparison to what we do now, what we've done for many years. Some lawyers won't remember back to these other days, but in the old days, the insurance companies had their own structure people, and they had their own structure insurance company that they wanted to use all the time. So if you were dealing with Acme Insurance, then Acme Insurance had Acme Structured Settlement Annuity Company. And so they would say, well, we're going to pay you this number of dollars over time and some of this up front. Isn't that great? You're getting $100,000, but you're not getting the $99,000 until you turn 99. Well, how much is that? What's the present value of that? Oh, well, we don't have to tell you that. Well, actually, you do. And we need to know, because we need to know how our fee is structured, but more importantly, we need to know what we're really settling for. So these independent structured settlement agents, so to speak, came along, who could not only help inform to you what the amount of money is that is actually being settled for, but could also take that money and place it with other companies so that you might get a better rate of return, which is interest rate, but they call them internal rate of returns in annuities, so it's how much money are you actually getting in interest on your investment. So that's what we use now. So if I go to a settlement conference where I know it's either a bigger case or a child or whatever, I will bring along one of these agents and have him there with us, so he's got his computer and he's telling us, this is what I can do with the money, and this is when you start talking to your client about what works best for them. What do they need now? What do they need in the future? When will they need it in the future, and why? And so you do that right from the beginning.
So there are many companies, New York Life and AIG, and there are 5 or 6 that I can remember seeing very quickly. You would make that initial decision to bring somebody else in? Would the client ever say, I'll go shop this around, David?
Well, you can't shop it around too much on your own, because not a lot of those companies, some of them do, but not a lot of them do structured settlement personal injury annuities. It's a subset. And you cannot go and just buy an annuity with a settlement and have it serve the purpose that you want, which is to be tax-free. Because if the money goes into your hands, it goes into your hands on a settlement tax-free, but when you invest it, it comes out taxable, like any other investment that you would make. So we bring in these independent agents who have access to all of the companies that structure. Maybe not all of them, because some of them, like if it's a casualty, a liability insurance company, and they have their own branch, they might have their own branch, but that's okay. We'll take a quote from them too. but our guy's going to compare it to all the other quotes he can get, and the best insurance companies only, like AAA annuity companies, insured by AAA companies.
What happens when you walk someone through this far, they've made the determination that this is the right company, this is how much they're getting to cover, you said the lump sum to cover some medical, and this is how their structured settlement will play out for the next few years. Then the situation changes. I don't know, perhaps something else happens and they're about to be bankrupt, or their house is going to be foreclosed upon, and suddenly that stream is not helping them. What happens next? Do they need to go back to you and go back to court? What's the next process, David?
Yeah, so if you've settled your case and you now have that settlement annuity as one of your investments, so to speak, you cannot go back to the annuity company and say, you know what, I need the money now, I want to change the contract that we made, I want to change the agreement, because they don't do that and you can't make them do that. So there are these companies that will buy these annuities, and you're selling them at pennies on the dollar. I never recommend to do it, but sometimes there's a circumstance where the client has no choice. Most of these structured settlements to be bought are required, there is required court approval. And the courts look at it very carefully. And there's a calendar where they look at it, and the judge looks at it and wants to know why you want the money and what's the situation and what's the compelling reason for me to grant this. And they'll see past, you have a drug problem and you're using it for drug use. You have a gambling problem and you need it for gambling debts. And they will be very careful on when or if they'll approve the sale of that structured settlement, because they're trying to protect you, because they know these companies come in, and they'll also look at what the company's paying, because they will try, if your annuity is worth $200,000 now, it's going to pay out $500,000 over time, and they can buy it for $100,000, they're making 50% on their money right away. And the judges want to protect against that.
So right up front, you spend an awful lot of time, I assume, then with a client to make sure that you cover as many of these contingencies so that they are making the best decision up front.
Right.
And it's not that they can't transfer some part of it later, but then it is out of your hands, and then they have another sequence of events when they're trying to evaluate it on their own, apparently.
Right. When you look at the circumstances today, which is really all you can deal with, and today's circumstances, and even forecasting what your future is going to be, you put that all into, the pot, so to speak, and making the decisions as to what you want to do. So if you need more money today, structure less of it. If you don't need the money today and you're worried about your retirement, structure more of it. But know that once you structure it, it's done. It's like you buy an annuity in your life. You cash them out, there's big penalties. You can't even cash these out.
A question that was asked, if someone is likely to be taking Social Security in the next few years, and yet they are about to discuss this with you, this structured settlement and the annuity, do you factor in what that Social Security is going to be? Because now they will have yet another income stream, and that might affect how you would structure it and how much they actually need, and that would also go into the actuarial that the insurance company would look at too?
Certainly. And on the workers' compensation side, which you mentioned earlier, it's very important, because workers' compensation payments can be a set-off as to what you get for Social Security. So if you settle a workers' compensation case, that settlement is then considered payable over your entire life expectancy. So the weekly amount that you were getting is now divided over in the lump sum, that total number of weeks that you're expected to live, which is a much lower number, which will increase the amount of Social Security you'll get because the set-off is lowered. So it's in the settlement of workers' comp, certainly an important factor. And then, of course, how much money do I need in a structure? You can structure comp settlements too, workers' comp settlements. So if that's the case, need to know what you're putting in and when it's coming out, and all the same reasons about what you're doing with that. Certainly with what they call Medicare set-aside accounts, you often structure those.
Good to know. If you see that someone is just plain not good with money or wouldn't know how to invest it, would that automatically help direct you to suggest to someone, take the structured settlement, it'll be meted out evenly, you're not likely to invest in, I don't know, maybe Bitcoin is fine, but in
Yeah.
other words, you might not be putting them at risk. or
Well,
you
Bitcoin
factor
might
them.
be a good
It might be a
investment.
good
You
one, it
never
might
know.
not.
But I wouldn't touch it.
I wouldn't either.
But the answer is you try to get them to understand all of those issues, and maybe if there's family, involve the family in it. But if a person's capable of making their own decisions, then you have to leave it in their hands.
Good. Let's talk in the remaining few minutes about the downside of the settlement issue. Those annuities, there's a thing called inflation. The understanding is an insurance buyer beware, perhaps, because you may know what the fixed income stream is, but if you can't account for what the what might happen in terms of inflation, could that be a bad choice?
Well, you can take that into consideration. And in some of those bigger cases that I was involved with that I told you about, we actually can put right into the annuity a cost of living increase, a COLA built in, which in some of them that we did probably far outpaces inflation over the last many years. So if you don't put in, and that's a very expensive component to the annuity.
Sure.
So if you put that in, it means you've gotten enough money in your settlement to really take care of it the right way, and we often do that. But if you don't put it in, you just have to know that this amount of money today is not going to be worth nearly as much, even though it's the same amount in the future, because that's part of the present value of money.
Okay, and then another downside to be considered, whether it's at the place where you're doing the annuity or if someone decides to take it on their own and do that transfer or try to reconfigure that later, the expected benefit. So the $300,000 payout, if you are expected to live, a 71-year-old might be expected to live another 9 years, and it will yield 1.2 million or whatever it is. Someone thinks that's just terrific. Meanwhile, that person who was injured at 71 might not live the 9 years. They might live to 3, and they're never going to see that very large tail end of that. So how do you caution someone about what the expected benefit is, which may never be realistic? It might be very illusory. How do you handle that, David?
And so it's very interesting. So as I explained in that case in the beginning, to ensure that at least the money put in comes out, we had a certain guaranteed number of years. So you can make the annuity payable for a sum certain or a time frame certain. So you can do that. And what was interesting in that case is because of the severity of the injuries, they took her life expectancy and lowered it so that it was much less expensive to insure it for her life. What she did in exchange for that was to live a long time. She's lived way past that life expectancy.
That certainly is a good outcome.
Yes.
We hope that this has been helpful to you. We hope you never have to deal with these things, but we hope that you will stay tuned to The Law Matters, because it certainly matters to you.